People don't circle your name by accident. They do it because silence couldn't erase you. Chosen ones, listen closely. If you've felt that strange pressure lately, like conversations stop when you enter a room, like your name keeps surfacing in places you've never stepped into, you're not imagining it. And no, it's not coincidence. You didn't suddenly become interesting overnight. You became unavoidable, and that's what they're trying to hide from you. Here's the truth they won't say out loud. When you stopped chasing validation, you became the topic. When you stopped explaining yourself, you became the mystery. When you chose growth over approval, you became the reference point. That's how it works. The moment you step out of the crowd starts talking about you. And let's be clear, this isn't about ego. This is about impact. You're not loud, yet your presence echoes. You're not forcing attention, yet attention follows you. You didn't declare yourself important. Life did it for you. Like a match struck in a dark room, you didn't ask people to look, but now they can't stop staring. Some squint, some complain about the light, some pretend they don't see it, but every single one of them feels it. You might be wondering right now, why me? Why are they watching? Why does my name keep coming up? Because average doesn't get discussed. Comfortable doesn't get analyzed. Forgettable doesn't get tracked. You disrupted something just by existing. Think of it like this. When a frequency is too strong, weaker signals start to distort. Static appears. Noise increases. That noise? That's the chatter around your name. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're broadcasting something real in a space full of imitation. They don't talk about you because they understand you. They talk about you because they can't. Some of them smile in your face and replay you in their mind later. Some of them act indifferent but check for updates the moment they're alone. Some of them criticize, some admire, some resent. But all of them are tuned in. That's the part they'll never admit. It's easier to downplay you publicly than to admit privately that your existence exposed something they've been avoiding. You see, being chosen isn't about being special in a loud way. It's about being different in a way that can't be ignored. You move without permission. You don't mirror the room, you shift it. And people who rely on control, predictability, and hierarchy hate that, because you can't be placed neatly into their boxes. You might be asking yourself, if I'm really that impactful, why does it feel uncomfortable? Why does it come with tension? Because growth is threatening to people who've settled. Because clarity is offensive to people living in confusion. Because confidence, quiet confidence, feels like rebellion to those who survive on comparison. The strongest people don't need an audience. That's why everyone becomes their audience anyway. You didn't step into this role by trying. You stepped into it by surviving what others used as excuses. You walked through pressure that would have broken them. You learned to stand alone without needing applause. And that kind of self-containment? That's dangerous to people who only feel alive through external approval. So yes, they talk, they speculate, they rewrite your story when you're not in the room. They question your motives, your calm, your confidence. Because if they admitted the truth, that you earned your position by becoming aligned with yourself, they'd have to face why they didn't. Another truth they hide from you. You are not being discussed because you're relevant to their lives. You're being discussed because you challenge their identity. You represent the road not taken, the boundary they didn't set, the courage they postponed. And every time your name comes up, it's a reminder that something inside them stayed stuck while you moved forward. So if you've been feeling watched, analyzed, or subtly resisted, don't shrink. That reaction isn't a warning, it's confirmation. You didn't lose people. You outgrew their comfort with you. And that always comes with noise. Remember this metaphor. Storms don't form around still air. They form where pressure shifts. You are the pressure shift. They can whisper, they can speculate, they can pretend they don't care, but conversation always follows influence. And right now, whether they admit it or not, you're the unspoken reference in their minds. So stand tall in that, walk steady, let the tension motivate you, not weigh you down. Because the fact that they're talking, while trying to make it look like they're not, is proof of one thing only. You didn't just enter the room, you changed it. Before we go any further, take a moment to support this message. If this video resonates with you, like it so it reaches others who need this clarity right now. Subscribe to the channel and stay connected to this movement, because these messages are meant to build strength, awareness, and confidence over time. And if you're in a position to give a little extra support, consider using Super Thanks. Your contribution directly helps our team continue putting in the time, energy, and effort to create powerful, inspiring, and life-changing content like this. Every bit of support matters more than you know. Number 1, they pretend you're irrelevant, yet track your every move. If someone truly didn't care, they wouldn't need updates. Chosen one, this is where the illusion breaks. They pretend you're irrelevant, but they know your schedule better than their own. They downplay your presence, yet somehow always know when you've moved, shifted, upgraded, or gone quiet. They act unbothered in public, but privately they keep mental notes like accountants tracking losses. That contradiction isn't accidental, it's exposure. Here's the truth they hope you never connect. Ignoring someone requires zero effort. Tracking someone takes energy, attention, focus, and nobody invests energy into something they believe is meaningless. So when you sense eyes on you, even in silence, when you feel your name hovering in rooms you've never entered, when reactions change without explanation, that's not paranoia. That's pattern recognition. You became a reference point. And that terrifies people who built their confidence by staying unnoticed. They want you to believe you don't matter, because if you realized how much you do, you'd stop questioning yourself altogether. That's why the dismissal is loud and the watching is quiet. That's why they roll their eyes, but lean in. That's why they laugh it off, but never miss a detail. It's a performance meant to keep you small while they stay informed. Think of it like this. When a new standard appears, outdated systems start malfunctioning. They don't announce it. They glitch. They lag. They overheat. That's what you're witnessing. Your presence isn't loud, but it disrupts the environment, and disruption always gets monitored. You might be asking yourself right now, if I'm really that important, why won't they just admit it? Because admission would mean surrender. It would mean accepting that you rose without permission, that you didn't need their validation, that you didn't wait to be approved before becoming yourself. And that hits harder than open competition ever could. People who claim you're nothing spend the most time proving it to themselves. They don't track you because they admire you openly. They track you because you challenge something internal. You move freely. You don't over-explain. You don't perform for approval. And that independence makes people who rely on hierarchy feel unstable. You didn't ask where you rank. You just moved forward. That alone rewrote the rules. Notice how the energy changed when you stopped reacting, when you stopped defending yourself, when you stopped announcing your plans. Suddenly, curiosity spiked, speculation increased, because when people can't read you, they study you. When they can't predict you, they monitor you. You became uncontainable. And here's what really stings them. You didn't do it loudly. You didn't campaign for relevance. You didn't demand attention. You simply lived in alignment with yourself. You focused, you built, you healed. And while they were busy measuring worth by visibility, you were becoming solid without needing a spotlight. That kind of growth doesn't make noise at first. It makes pressure. Pressure makes people watch. They want to believe you're insignificant because significance threatens their comfort. If you matter, then effort matters. If you rose, then excuses collapse. If you did it without approval, then all the waiting, performing, and compromising they did starts to look unnecessary. So they choose denial with a side of surveillance. Another truth they don't want you to hear: people don't monitor what's behind them, they monitor what might pass them. You're not behind them anymore. That's why they pretend you're irrelevant while reacting to everything you do. That's why silence from you feels louder than their announcements. That's why your smallest shift creates speculation. You're not playing the same game, and that makes you impossible to measure with their tools. You might wonder, should I dim this? Should I move quieter? No. Because the moment you shrink, you validate the lie they're telling themselves. The lie that your presence was accidental. It wasn't. You earned your position by becoming disciplined where others stayed distracted, honest where others stayed performative, steady where others stayed reactive. You didn't just change lanes, you left the highway, and people always watch those who dare to do that. Understand this clearly. Being chosen doesn't mean being superior. It means being unavoidable. It means your actions carry weight. Your absence creates questions. Your silence invites analysis, and your progress forces comparisons nobody asked for, but everyone feels. They pretend you're irrelevant because relevance can't be controlled, and you are proof of that. So let them track, let them speculate, let them minimize out loud and magnify you in private. That behavior isn't weakness on your part, it's confirmation of your impact. You don't need to announce your value, their attention already did that for you. Walk steady, stay focused, let the contradiction fuel you, because the same people acting like you don't matter are the ones making sure they never lose sight of you. Number 2, the moment you stopped chasing approval, you became the conversation. The fastest way to become unforgettable is to stop asking to be accepted. Chosen one, this shift didn't happen quietly, and that's exactly why they noticed. The moment you stopped chasing approval, something snapped in the invisible order of things. You didn't announce it, you didn't explain it, you just withdrew your energy from places where it was being measured, judged, negotiated. And that withdrawal, that's what made you impossible to ignore. People felt the absence before they understood the reason. They felt the change before they could name it. Suddenly, the person who used to respond, adjust, soften, and accommodate, didn't. And that silence hit harder than any argument ever could. Here's what most people never realize. Approval is a leash. And the second you dropped it, you stopped being predictable. You stopped being manageable. You stopped being easy to read. And people who are used to control panic when access disappears. That's when curiosity turns into obsession. That's when indifference turns into conversation. You might have felt it yourself. The room didn't react the same way anymore. The dynamic shifted. People who barely noticed you before suddenly had opinions. People who never asked questions suddenly had theories. Because when you stop chasing validation, you force everyone else to sit with their own motives. And most people don't like what surfaces when there's no one left to please. Let's say this plainly. When you were seeking approval, you were useful, you were flexible, you were safe. But when you stopped, you became free. And freedom disrupts environments built on unspoken rules. You didn't break the rules out loud, you simply stopped following them. And that quiet refusal shook the structure more than rebellion ever could. You might be wondering, why does my silence bother them so much? Why does my calm feel threatening? Because approval seekers are easy to dismiss. Approval-free people are not. You can't manipulate someone who isn't looking for permission. You can't guilt someone who already made peace with being misunderstood. And you can't intimidate someone who decided they'd rather be aligned than liked. That's when the talking started. People only discuss what they can't control anymore. The moment you stopped explaining yourself, they started explaining you. To others, to themselves, to anyone who would listen. Because losing access to you meant losing leverage. And leverage is what insecure systems run on. They needed you responsive. They needed you doubting. They needed you seeking reassurance. But you chose self-respect instead. And that choice rewrote the entire dynamic. Notice how they frame it. They say you changed. They say you became distant. They say you think you're better now. But what they really mean is you stopped performing for us. You stopped adjusting your tone to make others comfortable. You stopped shrinking your boundaries to fit inside expectations you never agreed to. And when you did that, the illusion collapsed. Approval chasing keeps peace on the surface. Approval independence exposes what was always underneath. Think of it like this. When someone stops clapping on cue, the performance feels awkward. When someone stops laughing on command, the joke loses power. When someone stops asking for validation, the hierarchy breaks. You didn't step out of line, you stepped out of the script. And people who rely on scripts don't know what to do when someone improvises their life. That's why your name circulates now. That's why they analyze your tone, your choices, your distance. Because you represent a choice they didn't think was allowed. You showed that it's possible to move forward without consensus, to be grounded without constant reassurance, to be present without being available. And that realization unsettles them. You might ask, should I go back to being softer, more agreeable, easier to read? Ask yourself this instead. Did chasing approval ever actually protect you, or did it just delay your growth? Because the truth is, the peace you gained by letting go is real. The clarity is real. The strength is real. And the conversations happening behind your back are just the side effect of you choosing yourself without apology. Another truth worth sitting with. The moment you stop asking where you stand, people start arguing about where to place you. You don't owe anyone the version of you that was easier to control. You don't owe explanations for choosing alignment over acceptance. And you certainly don't owe silence just because your confidence makes others uncomfortable. Let them talk, let them guess, let them build narratives to fill the space where your approval used to be. That space was never meant to stay empty. It was meant to be reclaimed by you. You didn't lose connection, you gained authority over your own energy. And the fact that you became the conversation the moment you stopped chasing it, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation. Stay steady. Keep your pace. Because the less you seek permission, the louder your presence becomes, without you ever raising your voice. Number 3, you're not loud. Your difference forces attention. Noise begs to be noticed. Presence gets noticed whether it wants to or not. Chosen one, this is the part they don't understand and never will. You're not loud, you're not flashy, you're not running around announcing who you are or what you're doing, and that's exactly why they can't stop paying attention. Because attention that's forced is cheap, but attention that's pulled is rare. You don't chase eyes, eyes follow you. You don't raise your voice. Your silence carries weight. They want to believe attention only comes from noise, drama, or performance. That's how they've survived. That's the only language they know. So when you walk into a space, calm, steady, unbothered, not seeking approval, it breaks their logic. You didn't play the role they expected. You didn't earn attention the way they were taught it has to be earned, and that's unsettling. Here's the truth they won't admit. You don't stand out because you try to. You stand out because you don't need to. Your difference isn't cosmetic. It's structural. It's in how you move, how you pause, how you don't rush to explain yourself. It's in the way you're comfortable not filling silence. And for people who live by performance, silence feels like power they don't have. You might have asked yourself, why do people react so strongly to me when I'm not doing anything? Because authenticity disrupts environments built on imitation. When something real enters a space full of rehearsed behavior, it doesn't blend in. It exposes contrast, and contrast forces attention whether anyone wants it or not. Think about a perfectly still room with a single ticking clock. The clock isn't loud, but once you notice it, you can't unhear it. That's how your presence works. You don't dominate the room, but once you're there, the energy rearranges itself around you. Some people lean in, some people stiffen, some people feel challenged without knowing why, but nobody stays neutral. People who crave attention fear people who command it without effort. You don't interrupt conversations, yet conversations change when you enter. You don't assert dominance, yet dynamics shift. That's because you're not operating on surface energy. You're grounded. You're intentional. And people who are scattered feel exposed around someone who is centered. They'll say things like, "You think you're better," or "You're too serious," or "You're distant." But those labels aren't observations. They're defenses. They're ways to explain discomfort without admitting admiration or insecurity. Because the real issue isn't your attitude, it's your self-containment. You're not feeding off reactions. You're not adjusting yourself to fit the room. You're not bending to keep others comfortable. And that independence draws attention the same way gravity pulls matter, not aggressively, inevitably. Here's what separates you from them. They need to be seen to feel real. You are real even when unseen, and that's threatening. Because if your value doesn't depend on validation, then validation itself starts to look weak, and people who built their identity on applause don't know how to compete with that. So they watch you, they analyze you, they talk about you, because they're trying to understand how someone can carry so much weight without making a scene. They're searching for the trick, the shortcut, the hidden strategy, but there isn't one. You didn't learn this from a guidebook. You earned it through pressure, self-awareness, and discipline they never developed. You might wonder, should I soften this? Should I be more approachable? No. Because what they call intimidating is often just integrity. What they call cold is often just boundaries. And what they call too much is usually just more than they're willing to become. You're not loud because you don't need to compete. You're not dramatic because you don't need distraction. You're not everywhere because you don't need constant reinforcement. And that kind of restraint reads as power in a world addicted to excess. Understand this. When you stop chasing attention, attention starts chasing you. That's the shift you made, whether you noticed it or not. And once that happens, there's no going back. People feel it. They sense it. Even if they can't explain it, they know something about you doesn't fold under pressure, and that makes you unforgettable. So don't second-guess your calm. Don't apologize for your depth. Don't mistake your stillness for weakness. You don't need to announce your difference. It announces itself. And every time they feel drawn to you without understanding why, every time your name comes up, even when you're silent, that's the proof. You're not loud, you're just impossible to ignore. Before we go any further, pause for a moment and really feel this. If any part of this message sounds familiar, it's because you've lived it. You've felt the looks, the shift in energy, the unspoken reactions. This is your space now. You're not here to stay silent or doubt yourself. You're here because your experience matters and your perspective carries weight. Don't hold it in. Say what you've noticed. Share what you've felt but never said out loud. Write it in the comments. Your words might be exactly what another chosen one needs to read today. Number 4. Your presence presses nerves because it reflects the life they never stepped into. Nothing agitates a person faster than standing next to proof of their own hesitation. Chosen one, this is where things get uncomfortable for them and empowering for you. Your presence doesn't irritate people because you're doing something wrong. It agitates them because you embody something they postponed, avoided, or abandoned. You walk into a space carrying evidence. Not evidence you announce, not evidence you brag about, but evidence that it was possible to live differently. And for people who built their identity around settling, that realization hits like a sudden drop in altitude. You might notice it in the way conversations stiffen when you arrive, in the forced laughter, in the sudden defensiveness, in how people either overcompensate or go quiet. That reaction isn't about your words. Half the time you haven't even spoken yet. It's about contrast. You remind them, without trying, that they chose comfort when they could have chosen growth. And here's the part that matters. You didn't do this on purpose. You didn't wake up planning to trigger anyone. You simply became yourself. You aligned your actions with who you really are, instead of who was easiest to be. And that alignment is disruptive to people who live out of sync with themselves. Think of it like standing next to someone who kept hitting pause on their own life. You don't need to say anything. Your movement alone highlights their stillness. Your discipline exposes their distractions. Your clarity shines a light on the confusion they've been avoiding. And the mind doesn't like being confronted with gaps it can't explain away. So they react. Some try to compete with you suddenly, some dismiss you, some talk behind your back, some act like you changed, even though the truth is you just stopped shrinking. They need a story that protects their self-image. Because admitting the truth that they could have chosen differently would force accountability. And accountability feels heavier than resentment. You might ask yourself, why do they act threatened when I'm not threatening them? Because truth doesn't need aggression to feel sharp. Reality cuts quietly. People rarely resent who you are. They resent what you represent. You represent momentum. You represent courage in action. You represent follow-through. And that's uncomfortable for people who live on potential they never cash in. You're not pointing fingers. You're not reminding them verbally. But your existence alone says it can be done. And that message lands differently depending on who's listening. For someone ready to grow, it inspires. For someone committed to staying the same, it threatens. That's why reactions vary so wildly. That's why the same person who once supported you now seems irritated by your calm. That's why your boundaries suddenly get labeled as attitude. Your focus gets called arrogance. Your peace gets misread as distance. They need to reframe you so they don't have to re-examine themselves. Understand this clearly. Discomfort is not the same as harm. You are not hurting anyone by living honestly. You are simply refusing to perform a smaller version of yourself to keep others comfortable. And that refusal exposes the quiet compromises they made with themselves years ago. Picture this metaphor. You're walking with a steady stride, not rushing, not dragging your feet, just moving. And beside you is someone who told themselves they'd start one day. Every step you take feels like a countdown to them. Not because you're better, but because you moved when they stalled. Your pace becomes a reminder they can't mute. So they label you. They say you're intense. They say you're different. They say you think you're above things. All of that is translation. What they're really saying is, you make me aware of what I didn't do. And awareness hurts when it comes late. Here's the part you need to hear as a chosen one. This tension is not a signal to retreat. It's a signal that you're aligned. You didn't get louder, you got clearer. You didn't become cold, you became consistent. And consistency exposes inconsistency without saying a word. If you've been wondering whether to soften yourself, slow down, or blend back in, don't. That instinct is old conditioning, trying to keep peace by sacrificing truth. The peace it offers is temporary. The cost is permanent. Your role isn't to make others comfortable with their avoidance. Your role is to live fully enough that reality stays visible. And here's the final truth they don't want you to grasp. They're not angry at you for becoming who you are. They're angry at themselves for not becoming who they could have been. So let the reactions come. Let the discomfort surface. Let the tension exist. You're not here to manage their feelings. You're here to honor your own path. because every time your presence triggers someone, it's proof that you're walking forward while they're still negotiating with yesterday. Number 5. Your progress tore the mask off every excuse they were living behind. Nothing threatens a comfortable lie more than someone who proves it was never true. Chosen one, this is the part they struggle with the most, even if they never say it. Your progress didn't just move you forward, it backed them into a corner. You didn't argue with their excuses. You didn't debate them. You didn't try to convince anyone of anything. You simply kept moving. And that steady movement did more damage to their comfort zone than any confrontation ever could. They built their identity on reasons. Reasons why it wasn't the right time. Reasons why the system was unfair. Reasons why they had more potential than results. Reasons why they were almost there. Those reasons became furniture in their mind, so familiar they stopped questioning them. Then you came along and stood up with the same obstacles, the same pressure, sometimes even less support, and you still moved forward. Not loudly, not perfectly, but consistently. And consistency is brutal to people who survive on explanations. You didn't just succeed. You invalidated the story they told themselves to stay still. That's why the tone around you shifted. That's why encouragement quietly turned into distance. That's why curiosity became criticism. Because your progress forced a comparison they were never prepared to make. You became living proof that what they called circumstances were really just choices dressed up nicely. Here's the part they don't want to admit. It's easier to doubt you than to admit they doubted themselves for too long. They told themselves they were waiting for clarity. You moved with uncertainty. They told themselves they needed motivation. You moved while tired. They told themselves they needed permission. You moved without asking, and now the excuse factory shut down. You might be wondering, why does my growth seem to irritate people who said they wanted the best for me? Because your growth changed the rules. It made effort unavoidable. It made accountability visible. It turned potential into something measurable. And people who rely on one day hate being reminded that today was always available. Your progress didn't embarrass them publicly. It exposed them privately. They started revising your story because the original version was too threatening. Suddenly, it was luck, timing, help you didn't really have, privileges you didn't benefit from, anything to avoid the simplest conclusion that you chose discipline when they chose delay. And understand this clearly. They are not angry at how far you've gone. They're angry at how close they could have been if they'd started when you did. That realization is heavy, so instead of carrying it, they project it. Another truth they won't say out loud. When someone else succeeds, excuses either evolve or collapse. Yours collapsed, theirs. You didn't just rise, you rewrote what was possible in their mind. And that's dangerous because once the illusion cracks, it can't be repaired. They can't unsee your progress. They can't unknow that you did it without the perfect conditions they kept waiting for. They can't erase the evidence that movement beats planning when planning becomes avoidance. That's why they talk about you when you're not there. That's why your name keeps circling conversations that have nothing to do with you. You became the example they didn't ask for but can't escape. And here's the quiet power you hold. You never asked them to learn from you. You just became the lesson. You might feel guilt sometimes, like your success created tension you didn't want. Let that go. You didn't create discomfort. You revealed it. You didn't break relationships. You exposed how fragile they were when challenged by growth. Anyone who truly wanted to see you win wouldn't need you to slow down to feel comfortable. They call you different now, not because you changed, but because you stopped playing along. You stopped apologizing for momentum. You stopped shrinking your goals to protect other people's explanations. And that's when the excuses really started shaking. Because once one person proves something is possible, everyone else has to decide whether they'll rise or keep hiding. Most choose hiding. It's quieter there, safer, less demanding. But it comes with resentment, and that resentment needs a target. That target became you. So if you've felt tension around your progress, distance where there used to be support, silence where there used to be noise, don't second-guess yourself. You didn't do anything wrong, you just moved forward in a space where people preferred comfort over courage. Let your progress keep speaking. Let it keep exposing what no longer holds up. You don't need to defend your pace. You don't need to explain your growth. The results already answered every excuse they were holding on to. And the fact that they can't stop talking about it, even while pretending it doesn't matter, that's not coincidence. That's confirmation. Number 6, they watch you like a blueprint, because what you are can't be recreated. People only study what they secretly believe is out of their reach. Chosen one, this is one of the hardest truths for them to swallow, and one of the most important for you to understand. They don't watch you because they're curious. They watch you because they're confused. They're trying to figure out how someone like you exists without following the same formulas they depend on. They slow down around you. They observe your moves. They analyze your silence, not because they admire openly, but because they're searching for a shortcut that doesn't exist. You carry something they can't reverse engineer. They've tried. You've seen it. The copied tones, the borrowed confidence, the sudden changes in how they dress, speak, move, or posture themselves after watching you. But no matter how closely they mimic the surface, something always feels off. That's because what makes you powerful was never on the surface to begin with. Here's the part they won't admit. You're not impressive because of what you do. You're unsettling because of how you are. You move without rushing. You stand without needing reinforcement. You stay calm in moments that would fracture them. And that stability, earned, not performed, drives them into quiet obsession. They keep studying because they believe there must be a trick, a hidden step, a secret advantage, something they missed. But there isn't. You weren't built from instructions. You were shaped by pressure, by repetition, by restraint, by choosing growth when nobody was watching. And people who avoid discomfort their entire lives can't understand how someone walks with that kind of internal balance, so they observe you like a puzzle they're determined to solve. You might ask yourself, why does it feel like they're always watching, even when I'm doing nothing special? Because authenticity can't be copied. And that makes people desperate. Here's a line that cuts clean. They don't want your life. They want your outcome without your experience. They want your composure without your discipline. Your clarity without your reflection. Your presence without the work it took to become grounded. They want the results without the refinement. And because they don't understand how you arrived here, they assume there must be something hidden you're not saying. So they watch, they replay your words, they study your reactions, they notice how you don't overreact, how you don't scramble for attention, how you don't explain yourself when misunderstood. And the more they watch, the more frustrated they become, because nothing unlocks, nothing clicks, there's no formula to steal. You are the result of lived experience, not strategy. Think of it like this. Some people are manufactured, others are forged. Manufactured things can be replicated. Forged things carry marks that can't be duplicated. You carry those marks. And people who've never been tested don't recognize strength unless it looks loud or dramatic. Your quiet certainty disrupts their expectations. They start asking questions internally they never planned to face. Why does this person move so freely? Why don't they seem rattled? Why do others respond to them even when they say very little? Those questions don't lead to answers. They lead to insecurity. So they study harder. But here's the truth you need to hold on to. Being watched doesn't mean being threatened. It means being unrepeatable. You didn't rise by copying others. You didn't stabilize yourself by blending in. You became solid by being consistent with yourself, even when it was inconvenient. That kind of alignment creates a presence people feel before they understand, and that presence can't be downloaded. They may borrow aesthetics, they may imitate confidence, they may rehearse your phrases or gestures, but none of it lands the same, because what people respond to in you isn't performance, it's coherence. Everything about you matches. Your words, your pace, your boundaries, your energy. That congruence is rare, and rarity attracts attention even when people wish it didn't. You might wonder, should I hide this? Should I simplify myself so I don't stand out as much? No, because the moment you dilute yourself, you start becoming what they are, replaceable. Here's another truth they don't want you to realize. People who can't become you will always try to decode you. Let them study. Let them observe. Let them come up empty. Their inability to replicate you isn't your burden to carry. It's the result of paths they didn't walk and choices they didn't make. You're not ahead because you cheated. You're ahead because you stayed with yourself when others abandoned themselves. You don't owe them explanations. You don't need to justify your pace. Your job isn't to become understandable to people who refuse to do the work you did. Your job is to remain intact. So when you feel that quiet attention, that subtle surveillance, that sense of being evaluated, don't tense up. Recognize it for what it is, proof that you're operating on a level they can't access. They study you because they can't recreate you. And that's not a weakness, that's your leverage. Number 7, when they lose control, they rewrite the narrative. That's why your name keeps circling back. When people can't move you, they try to move the story around you. Chosen one, this is where everything finally makes sense. There's a specific moment when attention turns into noise. It's not when you argue back. It's not when you defend yourself. It's when control slips through their fingers. The second they realize you're no longer adjustable, influenceable, or emotionally reachable, something shifts. Silence stops working for them. Distance doesn't give relief. And that's when stories begin. Not because they're true, but because they're necessary. When someone can no longer steer your reactions, they try to steer perception. When they lose access to you, they compensate by controlling the version of you that lives in conversation. That's why your name doesn't fade. That's why it keeps resurfacing. Not because you're present, but because you're no longer manageable. You didn't announce a rebellion. You didn't declare independence out loud. You simply stopped responding the way they expected. You stopped explaining yourself. You stopped chasing clarity with people who benefited from confusion. And that quiet shift did more damage to their sense of control than any confrontation ever could. Here's the question you've probably asked yourself. Why talk about me if I'm not even engaging? Because disengagement removes leverage, and without leverage, people panic. Think of control like gravity. As long as it's working, nobody notices it. But the moment something stops responding to it, attention locks in. You became that object that no longer falls when pushed. And instead of adjusting themselves, they started questioning the object. That's where the stories come from. They'll say you changed. They'll say you're distant. They'll say you think you're better now. Not because those things are accurate, but because they need an explanation that doesn't involve accountability. If they admitted the truth, that you simply grew beyond manipulation, they'd have to face why they didn't. So they fill the gap with language. Narratives are built when reality no longer obeys. You stopped obeying expectations. You stopped bending to pressure. You stopped responding to guilt disguised as concern. And when the old methods stopped working, words became the new tool. Because words are the last form of control people reach for when influence is gone. That's why the stories feel exaggerated. That's why they don't line up. That's why different people have different versions of you. None of them are about truth. They're about containment. Each version is an attempt to reduce you into something explainable, predictable, and less threatening. But here's the part that works in your favor. Stories spread faster when they're fueled by insecurity, and insecurity always leaks. People listening can feel when something's off. They sense the effort behind the narrative. They notice how often your name comes up for someone who's supposedly irrelevant. They feel the tension behind the smile, the extra detail, the rehearsed explanation. That's when curiosity flips direction. You don't need to correct the story. The overuse exposes it. You might wonder, should I clear my name? Should I explain my side? Ask yourself this instead. Why explain reality to people invested in fiction? The truth doesn't need repetition, lies do, and the more they repeat theirs, the heavier it becomes. You've reached a stage where your silence carries more authority than their words. And that terrifies people who rely on reaction, because reaction is proof of relevance, and you're no longer giving it away. Another thing they don't expect, the stories don't weaken you. They concentrate attention, they keep your name active, they keep you central, they keep you present in rooms you've never entered. Every retelling, every speculation, every attempt to define you without access only sharpens the contrast between who you are and who they claim you are. And contrast creates visibility. You didn't become the topic because you demanded attention. You became the topic because you removed compliance. And when compliance disappears, people scramble to reassert order, even if that order exists only in conversation. Understand this clearly. People don't gossip about what they've resolved. They gossip about what they can't control. Your calm is what broke the pattern. Your refusal to react exposed the imbalance. Your forward movement without permission rewrote the dynamic. And now, instead of pulling your strings, they pull sentences together hoping one of them sticks. Let them talk. Every story is evidence of distance. Every version proves lack of access. Every whisper confirms that you're no longer reachable in the ways that once made you easy to manage. You didn't disappear. You outgrew their reach. And when control fails, narratives become noise. You don't need to fight the noise, just keep moving, because while they're busy explaining you, you're busy becoming something they can't rewrite. Number 8. Your stillness unsettles those who survive on chaos. When the room depends on noise to feel alive, silence feels like an attack. Chosen one, this part cuts deep, because it explains why your calm makes certain people uncomfortable in ways they can't explain. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't provoke, you didn't compete. And yet, something about the way you move through situations without panic, without theatrics, without constant reaction feels threatening to them. That's not coincidence, that's contrast. You live with clarity in a world addicted to distraction. Some people only feel relevant when everything is loud, opinions flying, emotions spilling, reactions escalating. Noise keeps them from hearing their own thoughts. Chaos keeps them from noticing how unbalanced they really are. And then you show up steady, measured, grounded, not rushing to respond, not scrambling to prove anything. That's when the tension starts. Because calm doesn't argue, calm doesn't chase, calm doesn't need backup. And for people who build their identity on constant stimulation, your presence feels like a spotlight exposing how restless they are inside. You become a mirror without saying a word. You don't criticize their chaos, but your composure makes it obvious. That's why they say you're distant, cold, unbothered, too quiet. Those labels aren't observations, they're defenses. You might have asked yourself, why do they act weird when I'm just being myself? Why does my silence bother them more than someone else's noise? Here's the answer. Your calm forces self-awareness. And self-awareness is uncomfortable for people who've been running from themselves. Think about it. When someone thrives on noise, every moment of quiet feels dangerous. Silence removes distractions. It brings thoughts to the surface, regrets, doubts, questions they've been avoiding. So when you walk in carrying peace, You disrupt the environment they depend on to stay numb. You don't add to the chaos, you drain it. And that feels like loss to them. Here's a line they won't admit is true. People who fear silence usually have something they don't want to hear. Your calm doesn't mean you haven't been through anything. It means you went through enough to stop reacting to everything. You've learned when energy deserves access and when it doesn't. You've learned that not every comment needs a reply. Not every challenge deserves engagement. That kind of discipline doesn't come from comfort. It comes from experience. And that's why it rattles them. They expect emotional reactions. They expect defensiveness. They expect you to play the same loud game. When you don't, they don't know where to place you. You become unpredictable to people who rely on chaos to feel in control. Your restraint makes their impulsiveness obvious. Your patience highlights their urgency. Your stillness exposes how much they depend on noise to feel important. So they poke, they test, they provoke. Not because you did something wrong, but because they want a reaction that confirms you're just like them. And when you don't give it, frustration builds. That's when they start calling your peace arrogance, your boundaries hostility, your composure indifference. They reframe your calm into something negative so they don't have to question their own behavior. But here's the truth. Calm is not weakness. Calm is mastery. You don't need to dominate a room to influence it. You don't need to talk over people to be heard. Your presence carries weight because it's not scattered. It's intentional. And people who live in constant mental noise feel that weight immediately. It presses on them. It forces awareness. It makes them uncomfortable in their own skin. You've probably noticed this pattern. The more at peace you become, the more certain people react. That's not because you're changing for the worse. It's because you're no longer feeding the chaos that kept them comfortable. You stopped being entertainment. You stopped being reactive. You stopped being predictable. And predictability is safety for people who avoid growth. Your calm tells a story without words. It says you're no longer controlled by urgency, that you don't need external validation to feel solid, that you trust yourself enough to pause. And that message hits hard in environments where people equate loudness with power and busyness with value. Here's the motivation you need to hold on to. Your calm is not something to apologize for. It's evidence that you've outgrown survival mode. Let them misinterpret it. Let them feel uneasy. Let them talk about how different you've become. Their discomfort is not your responsibility. You didn't take anything from them. You just stopped giving away your energy. And that's why they notice you. In a world addicted to noise, calm stands out like a signal cutting through static. It doesn't beg for attention. It commands it. And whether they admit it or not, that's why your presence stays in their conversations long after you've left the room. Before we close this out, let this sink in for a moment. Everything you've been sensing wasn't random, and none of it was imagined. You don't become the center of conversations by accident. You earn that position by evolving, staying grounded, and refusing to disappear. Let that awareness sharpen you, not distract you. Keep moving with clarity. Keep choosing growth over reaction. And if this message connected with you, make sure you like the video, subscribe to stay aligned with what's next, drop 77 in the comments if you're done questioning your power, and share this with someone who needs this reminder.